Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the funeral service. We ask for those that have a cell phone or pager, if you could turn it to the silent mode. Officiating is Rabbi Michael Gottesman.
Mizmor David, Adonai Roi Lo Echsor, Yinos Desha Yarbit Seni, Alme Menuchos Yanaleni, Napshi Yeshoved, Yancheni B'Magleit Tzedek L'Man Shemo, Gam Ki Elech B'Geit Salmoves Lo Irara, Ki Ata Imodi, Shiftecha Umishantecha Hema Yachamuni, Ta'aroch Lefonai Shulchan Neged Sorai, Dishanta B'Shemen Roshi Kosi Rebayai, Achtova Chesed Yerdefuni Kol Yamei Chayai, V'Shavti B'Veis Adonai Liorech Yamin. Today we come here to pay tribute to the life of Dr. Jeffrey Buckman, Yaakov ben Moshe. Jeffrey was born, he was 80 years old. He was born on September 22nd, 1942, a date that was going to be shared by his future Beshert. Together with Myrna, they were just shy of their 55th wedding anniversary, which would have taken place on May 29th this year. Both Jeffrey and his wife, Myrna, they were both from the Chicago area, specifically Oak Park in Austin. Jeffrey worked at an institution that we all knew so well when we grew up in West Rogers Park. He worked at a place called 999 New York Kosher on Devon Avenue. When they first met, he was 18 and Myrna was actually 14. But they reconnected together at the Austin Community Center. They were married in 1968. Jeffrey went to Austin High School, where he graduated. He was a graduate of Northwestern University. He actually had a degree in microbiology. And however, as we all know, every Jewish mother wants their son to be a doctor. So off to Chicago Medical School he went. And that's how we know him as Dr. Jeffrey Buckman. After they were married, Jeffrey was given a position at the Cleveland Clinic, very prestigious position. He worked in internal medicine and specialized in nephrology there. When they returned to the Chicago area, he set up his practice with a specialty in vascular work. And here is where he spent all of his years, affiliated with Lutheran General Hospital, affiliated with the community, treating hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. He was a gifted physician, brilliant, but he was also a very good person. He was always happy. You could see how he reflected with his patients, with his family. But besides his career in medicine, there was nothing more important than his family. Husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He set before his family a clear direction in Yiddishkeit. Not only in Yiddishkeit, but he set before his family a path towards the importance of Eretz Yisrael, a path of Zionism, a path to know and to understand how much Israel, Eretz Yisrael, was part of each and every one of us, and how successful he was in instilling all these Torah values, all these values of our country and our family. His family absolutely followed in his path. On a personal level, I was able to meet Jeffrey through Hillel Torah. Our wives were very involved in the school, specifically in the PTA, which brought us together. And as individuals, we shared very similar political views, so we were really able to express ourselves together, especially lately in these times. He was extremely confident in what he believed. Of course, one cannot mention Jeffrey without that signature, incredible cowboy hat he always wore. As soon as he arrived at events, you knew he was there. He made his distinct mark. I'm going to miss that hat. But more importantly, I'm going to miss the man that wore it, that individual that was so great to every single person that he touched. Jeffrey is survived by his wife, Myrna, his children, Ari Buckman, married to Chaya, and Ahuva, Rachalea, Chana Mindel, Lori Buckman, married to Seth Gerson, Dov and Cheryl Gerson, Shani, Hillel, Alicia and Eliza Gerson, Tamar Gerson, Yakir Gerson, Tammy Buckman, married to Shlomo Drabkin, Eitan Drabkin, Adina Drabkin, and Yedida Rosenwasser, Ami, Nava Drabkin, Orly Drabkin, Jody Buckman, married to Adam Weinstein, Noah Weinstein, Ella Weinstein, Zoe Weinstein, Mac Weinstein, and his sister, Rachel Buckman Spindell, married to Dr. David Spindell and Gila Buckman. We'd like to hear now from his family to talk about Jeffrey. We first begin with Ari Buckman.
One time, after a visit with our parents, my youngest daughter, Chana Mindel, asked me, "How come Grandpa has more hair than you?" So after trying to explain genetics and how sometimes it can pass over a generation, she continued. And she says, "How come Grandpa's hair is darker than yours? Why isn't it gray like yours is?" I said to her, "That's why you have children, to get that certain inspiration from them." I chose to start with a bit of levity because that was what my dad was all about. He always wanted to make people smile and always wanted to make them happy. Many of you here can remember my dad as the camp doctor. And while in between fishing trips, when sick patients would come in, the campers, he would always do something to try to make them smile. It may have been a funny hat, it may have been a silly mask, an occasional spritz from a water gun would not be something that would be out of the realm of normal for him. But my dad understood that campers can be nervous going to a doctor, especially away from home without parents. And he always tried to lighten the mood and make them a little bit happier, even just for a minute. Speaking of silly hats, as I'm sure will be discussed many, many times, no discussion about our father could be complete without mentioning his trademark cowboy hat. To be honest, as much as we've seen it, none of us really understand how the minhag began, what the impetus was, the desire to have it on at all times, including in the shower. But it certainly, as was mentioned before, was his way of saying he has arrived. I can still remember when Ahuva, my oldest, was about 3 or 4, and another time visiting, before she had mastered whether to call him Zaidi or Grandpa or Pa, she simply looked up and said to me, "Daddy, where's the cowboy doctor?" And the name has stuck ever since. But I think it's because of his desire to always make people smile, along with his cowboy hat, that overshadowed the fact that our father had a brilliant mind. He literally knew everything about everything. Our house was constantly full with magazines ranging from medical magazines, photography magazines, car magazines, Reader's Digest, Consumer's Report. Any question you'd ask, you'd have an answer for. And I don't even want to get into the idea of politics because there's not enough time to get into his different opinions before our flight to Israel takes off. But mind was simply incredible. Typically in our house, a conversation would go like this. Daddy, why is the computer not working? I don't know, call Grandpa. Daddy, what cable should I use to plug into the computer so that the pictures on my camera can be viewed by everybody? I don't know, call Grandpa. Daddy, I got a sore throat. Does it mean I have strep? I don't know, call Grandpa. Daddy, I got a biology test. Can you explain to me this aspect of the digestive system? I don't know, ask Grandpa. Any question throughout my fatherhood, I would simply say, I don't know, ask Grandpa. And at every simcha, for every occasion, somehow he had a gematria that actually added up, and it always fit the occasion perfectly. And it's really not a surprise that he used his tremendous mind to become a doctor, because he was always about giving and wanting to make people feel better. He was simply a good old-fashioned doctor, an internal medicine specialist, which is such a rarity nowadays. Of course, that meant for us as a family that every childhood memory of ours is Dad's pager going off with a frantic search for the nearest phone, which in those days was not easy to find, and a call to the answering service, usually the emergency room. And he always gave the time, no matter where he was. He always made sure that he gave his patients the treatment and the attention that they deserved, no matter where he was, no matter what was happening at the time. He had a tremendous dedication and devotion to his craft. He was truly a gifted doctor, and he loved what he did. Even in the last few weeks, when he was in the hospital, and he was a bit lethargic, and not his usual perky self, nevertheless, whenever a doctor or nurse would walk in, he would instantly get up and start discussing the medical issues that he himself was facing and knew that the dire potential consequences, but he still perked up to discuss the various medical issues. He simply loved medicine and loved helping people, even himself. The Gemara in Shabbos brings down that one of the first questions a person is asked when they come to Shemayim is, were you honest in business? On this question, I have no doubt that Shemayim itself will testify the answer is yes. His honesty, integrity, and sincerity in his medical practice and his business dealings was exemplary, and he would consistently instill in us, through his own words and through his deeds and actions, the importance of being honest and doing what is right. However, he never wanted the attention or the accolades that came along with what he was doing. I can't prove it. However, I am convinced that one of the tafkidim that my parents had in life was to be the beacon of Judaism in Park Ridge, Illinois, less than 2 blocks away from Lutheran General Hospital. Everyone in the city knew that if they were stuck at Lutheran General Hospital, whether for a simcha of the birth of a child or nebach, a sick relative, you could always count on the Buckman household, unannounced, for a hot meal and a bed. The list of Shabbos guests in our house, both planned and unannounced, is literally endless. There is simply no end to their hospitality. Our house was always open to anyone and at any time. It seemed as if hardly a week went by without me or my sisters hosting an entertainment in our basement. There was nothing he loved more than seeing his children being happy with their fellow friends. Which brings me to my first story. I only have 3, so it won't be too long. And this is one of the more famous stories from the Skokie Yeshiva, and I still say Yeshiva, even though I'm living in New York now. And what happened is that my father happened to become the substitute coach for our basketball team. And because that's what my dad was. If there was a need to fill something in, he would do it on the spot, certainly for his kids. And although it meant he could not video that game and keep it with the other 4,000 VHSs that we have in our basement that no one ever watches, he still gave up of his time and conducted a practice. He walks in, as only my dad could, in a cowboy hat, and he says, let's face it, we have no chance. They're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, but if they don't have the ball, they can't score. So what we're going to do is we're going to call play 44, which means we all go in 4 corners and we just hold the ball. We just pass it back and forth. But if they don't have the ball, they can't score. So sure enough, we come out, tip off. The other team gets the ball, score, dunk it right away, reverse jam, whatever. And we get the ball, and my good friend Rabbi Schaffel calls out, all right, play 44. And that's it, just passing the ball 2 minutes, 3 minutes back and forth before days of the shot clock. And somehow, eventually, we scored a basket. Of course, they came down, the other team. 2 seconds later, I don't know, the guy jumped over a hoop or something, scored on us. We came down again, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, back and forth, passing. Somehow we scored again. They came down, they actually missed a shot, and the ball rolled out of bounds to our team. We got the ball, we went down, and we scored after another 2 minutes. And now we are with 8 minutes out of the first quarter, and we're leading 6-4. Their team called a timeout. And I'll never forget this. As we're walking back to the bench, one of their players says, wow, these Jews can play basketball. That was about the end of that. What I forgot to mention is that my father had said that if we lose by less than 50 points, he'll have a party for us at our house. A very exciting party. So, as luck would have it, with about 30 seconds left in the game, we were down by 51 points. We get the rebound, and we call a timeout. And the referee comes over to my dad and says, I understand trying to go to the last minute, but timeout, 15 seconds left, down by 51 points. My dad says, gotta teach him never give up, never give up. By now, the other team and their cheerleaders had known that what was happening, so they were rooting for us also to score. We called a play. It was for, of course, our leader, Rabbi Schaffel, to try to score. He starts to drive, couldn't make it to the basket. They cut him off. So he passed it to our other good player, Adam Samber at the time. And it was at the top of the key, and was facing the wrong way. And he just turned around and chucked it up as the time was expiring. And it was like in slow motion. The ball was going. And it went into the baskets. And the entire gym just jumped up and started running because everybody knew what was happening. We picked up Adam on his shoulders. We all ran off the court celebrating, and we had a party afterwards. Because that's what my dad was. He wanted us to have a party. He wanted us to be happy. He wanted us to enjoy his time together. I just want to end with 2 quick stories that really exemplify his incredible kindness and generosity, which he always did in a very quiet, unassuming manner. Just a few weeks ago, when we all came in because of his recent sickness, and we were visiting him in the ICU, over Shabbos, so we davened at the Chabad in our neighborhood. One of the regular mispalim in the shul asked how my father was doing. I explained that, he's a fighter. And he went on to tell me that just a week or two before that, before his sickness, our father had called him to give a donation to the shul in honor of his newest great-grandson, Jerry, otherwise known as Aminadov, and that he knew someone who could maybe use a little bit of help, who has ties to Ukraine, and maybe someone from Chabad who has experience in that kind of scenario would be of help. The Chabad got in touch with that person, and I understand things are progressing. If not for having been sick and hearing about this, nobody would know the tzedakah that he gave. And nobody would know the chesed that he did. That's the person who he was. He always tried to help in his own way. But that is what he taught us and instilled in his children. He didn't do it for the notoriety. He did it for the result. And finally, the story. I first want to apologize to the others who are a part of the story. I didn't get a chance to ask for permission to publicize it, but it's simply too good of a story to not share with everyone at this time. About 2 years ago, it was around this time of year actually, around Shavuos, and my daughter Rachelea was planning on going to sleepaway camp for the first time. Her intention was to go to Aguda in Toronto, following in her sister's footsteps. But around Shavuos, the camp had to cancel for the Americans because Canada decided to keep the border closed because of COVID. So now we are stuck without a camp at this late hour. All camps are full. And although it may not seem like the biggest deal, what do you do for camp? But especially at the time when we had been so locked up due to COVID, and there had been so much being stuck inside of a house, that the chance to go to camp, especially her first one, we felt was very important for her continued growth. So we had decided that maybe Aguda Midwest would be the most appropriate place for Rachelea. She had some friends she knew from Detroit who would be attending. There was a bus that went from Detroit. It'd make the trip there easy. So we called, and of course, we couldn't get in. It's full. There is no more room. We tried, we called, we tried connections, we tried calling people we knew, we called people we didn't know. We even called people who worked in the camp. Nobody could get her, we could not get her in. Finally, somebody who worked there said, look, the best I could do, I keep hearing no, the best I can do is give you the director's number, the director of the camp, call him yourself, good luck. He's expecting your call. So we called the director, and we did what we could. We explained how Rachelea had spent months in Detroit helping with my mother-in-law at the time, her grandmother, and was on Zoom, and all the things that she had done, and that she really would be a great camper. But the camp director kindly and respectfully kept saying there was nothing he could do. When it became apparent that the decision was made and wasn't going to be changed, so the conversation went to what every conversation goes to, which is Jewish geography. The camp director asked my wife, you're from New York, Buckman from New York, and you're now in Detroit. Do you happen to know the Buckmans in Chicago? So she said, well, of course, they're my in-laws. He said, do you know Dr. Jeffrey Buckman? She said, of course, my father-in-law. "25 years earlier, my father's partner, Phil Myers, passed away from an illness at a very early age. He left behind a almana with many kids. It turns out the camp director was his son. My father was devastated at the time, did everything he could. You name it, emotional, support, financial support, physical support, whatever he could to help a devastated family get over the loss of the head of their household. The camp director said, "How can I say no to Dr. Jeffrey Buckman's granddaughter? You're in camp." And the next day, we got an acceptance letter for Achalea. That's what my father was. This is 25 years later, and the Har Satov was fresh. Right away, you're in camp. She's in. You're Dr. Buckman's granddaughter. How can I say no? And the director was not so old. That meant at the time, 25 years ago, he was barely even a teenager. And still, 25 years later, the relationship my father had was there. How many of us have the ability that something we did would reverberate 25 years later? That is the lessons that our father taught us. And that's how he lived his life. Daddy, I want to ask you for mechila, for not giving you the covet you deserved and earned, for the godless in which you achieved. I hope I made you proud and gave you the nachas you warranted. As everyone, I have not yet even started Shiva, and everyone has said to me the same thing. Your dad is one of a kind. He will be missed. Daddy, you're one of a kind. I love you and miss you. You should be a nice share for the family and for Klal Yisrael.
Hi, I'm Jody, or as my dad liked to call me, LS. For those of you that know. I'm reading this speech on behalf of my sister Lori, who's in Israel. I think I was pretty young when I realized that my dad wasn't like all other dads. None of the other dads that I knew opened up an audio and video emporium in the living room. None of the other dads that I knew were official photographers for a Major League Baseball team's fantasy camp, and none of the other dads that I knew wore cowboy hats unless it was Purim. Some of my earliest memories of my dad were medical memories. Taking stitches out of my head in the kitchen twice, throat cultures at home before it was a thing to do throat cultures at home, and going on rounds with him at the hospital and then upstairs to the cafe for a treat. But as I reflect on my earliest memories of my dad, I realize that the many different things that I remember reflect the many different things that my father was passionate about. And there were so many of those things. When it came to reading, my father read everything. All kinds of books, magazines, medical journals, newspapers. In fact, when my dad designed himself a home office, he built a room that had a sloping ceiling so that he had a bookcase that was somewhere around 12 feet tall. Even with the ladder, we had trouble reaching the books on the top shelves. When it came to sports, I remember sitting on the other side of the glass wall watching my dad play racquetball, and I also remember going with both my mom and dad to the bowling alley to watch them compete in their bowling leagues. In later years, my dad loved watching basketball, the Bulls, playing golf, and as I said earlier, he loved his White Sox so much that he got a side gig with them as a photographer. When it came to music, he seemed to love everything. We had an old-fashioned record player in the living room that played all kinds of music: jazz, classical, chazanut, children's songs, opera, and rock. In fact, I distinctly remember as a young child thinking that it was so cool that a group called the Beatles had a record with an apple on it and they sang a song about the letter B. It goes without saying that his love for music came out in full force at Shabbat meals with his favorite Zmirot that he taught us to love as much as he did. I also remember his love and our trips to the opera and Bulls games, as he had season's tickets to both. While my mom was clearly the caregiver at home, Dad was the caregiver in his chosen profession. I will never forget the time, a long time ago, when Seth and I were flying from St. Louis to Chicago, and we struck up a conversation with the only other kippah-wearing person on the plane. When I introduced myself and said that my maiden name was Buckman, he asked if Jeffrey Buckman, the doctor, was my father. And when I said yes, he responded with, "Your father saved my father's life." And then I remember thinking to myself, cool, he actually does do something when he goes to work every day. The truth is that my father was an excellent diagnostician. He never stopped being our doctor, even separated by an ocean. We sent him lab results via WhatsApp. He looked at injuries over Skype back in the day, and even a few of my friends took his advice over the phone when it came to medical questions. But like I said, he was a caregiver, and only recently was I able to see that with my own eyes or hear about it myself. As my dad was growing sicker and it was harder for him to see patients the old-fashioned way, to the shock of all of us, he found a way to continue being a doctor through telemedicine. He would sit in the dining room with his iPhone and his Mac computer, and a physician assistant would go to the patient. He would see the patient over the phone and computer. On my trip to Chicago last year, I was able to witness the gentle way he would speak to his patients and explain to them their problems and what they had to do to get better. I especially remember him gently telling an elderly patient of how he loved his sweets as much as she did, and he knew how hard it was, but she had to stop eating sugar because of her diabetes. And this past week and a half, when my dad was in the ICU, was also a window into his world. He was in the ICU of Lutheran General Hospital, the hospital that he was on staff for about 45 years, the hospital where he was once the president of the medical staff, and the many doctors that came to see him spoke so highly of him as a colleague. But also, and more important in my eyes, is what the nurses said. They spoke about his professionalism and how he always treated them with the utmost respect. And they also spoke about how they were witness to how gentle and kind he was with his patients. The nurses at Lutheran were so wonderful this past 2 weeks, and when we thanked them for the wonderful care were giving to my father, they told us it was their honor to repay him with the kindness they had always seen him show to others. I have to add here that it was really a kick to see the response of some of the hospital staff who didn't know my dad by name, but certainly knew him as the doctor with the cowboy hat. And that cowboy hat, while after time it did become part of his shtick, its original purpose is another manifestation of his sensitivity as a caregiver. My dad started wearing the cowboy hat when he began treating patients in nursing homes. Firstly, it made them smile, but more importantly, he realized that it helped them communicate. Many of the patients didn't have the capacity to remember his name, but they could always remember the doctor with the cowboy hat. As I mentioned, my father was working in telemedicine. He was actually working that day that he went into septic shock just about 2 weeks ago. And that doesn't surprise me at all, because there is no one else that I know that was as determined as my dad or had the ability to take a bad situation and to make the best of it like my father was able to. If you have seen him at all in the past 5 years, you have a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. For the past 5 years, my dad has needed oxygen to breathe. Many people would feel saddled by always being hooked up to tubes and an oxygen tank, but not my dad. A simple thing like an oxygen tank could not stop my dad from working, shopping, finding a good bargain, from spoiling his grandchildren or playing golf with them, going out to eat, going to a good lecture, a shiur, a show, anything at all. He always took it with him. He was simply a master at always finding the silver lining and making the best of any situation. My dad had one of the biggest hearts that I knew. He loved everyone so fiercely, especially his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. As one of my children pointed out to me over Shabbos, you could literally feel his love through the phone. It is also maybe why my dad would never just call us, he would video call us or FaceTime us. He had to see us, and he wanted to see us, to see him as he expressed his love for us. But he didn't just love us, he loved everyone, his friends, his colleagues, his employees. This love that he had for everyone came to life in the generous spirit that he had displayed so openly. He and my mom together, in what would have been 55 years later this month, had a house that was bursting with activity and lots of stuff, with guests, simply with giving. If mom wanted to host boys from the yeshiva for Shabbos, no problem. And of course, I never minded that either. If mom wanted to open our home to boys becoming frum, no problem. If mom wanted to adopt a teenage foster child for a year, no problem. If mom heard about a family with 6 children whose home flooded and needed a place to stay for 2 or 3 weeks, no problem. I could honestly go on, but you get the picture. Also, not many people gave up their vacation time to volunteer, but that's what my dad did. For 2 weeks during the summer, my dad would volunteer as doctor at Camp Mosheva in Wild Rose. While he was happy to help the camp with treating the sick and tired campers, he also loved the friends he made at camp, both the young and the old. He loved the family time he had at camp when we would go to Silver Lake. And speaking of Silver Lake, there were those mornings that I remember very clearly when my father would wake me up while it was still dark out so we could be at the lake at the crack of dawn to go fishing. And while driving to Silver Lake or Watoma or Wapaka, my dad loved talking to the truckers out there on the road using his CB radio name, Medicine Man, Medicine Man. Anyone who remembers my dad from camp, I think, would agree that at camp, his zest for life, his nurturing nature, and his love of being with family and friends all came together for him. He really, truly loved those days. My dad had a minhag that I would like to share with you that I think sums up who he was pretty well. Whenever he could, he would make up an excuse to say the bracha of Shechianu. For example, if all of us were home together for the first time in a while, he would say something like, "This is the first Shabbos in November of 1986 that we are all home. Baruch atah Hashem Shechianu." Or, "This is the first time since the summer is over that we're all together in the house. Baruch atah Hashem Shechianu." I have to admit that when we were younger, we found it kind of annoying. We would roll our eyes and beg our dad to stop it already with the Shechianus. But I have come to realize that those Shechianus were our dad's way of simply showing how grateful he was and how happy he was by the simpler things that he had in life, like his family being together. It was a declaration of his love for us and his love for Hashem and the blessings that he felt. Before I finish up, I have to express Hakarat Hatov I have for my sister Tammy and my brother-in-law Shlomo for all that they have done for my parents since we made Aliyah. We tried to do what we could from afar, but they were there on the ground, never hesitating to take care of our parents when something came up. And now, to end my thoughts, I will share with you a memory I have of my father from when we were all little. It was a trick that he used to do with us. He would lay down on his back on the floor of the den, and it always had to be in the den, nowhere else. He would put his hands over his head. We would stand on his hands, and he would grip our feet, and in one movement, he would raise his hands and feet at the same time, and we would fly up in the air, grab his feet, and oftentimes complain about how smelly they were. Then when my father felt the time was right, he would say, "Now." He would let go of his feet, and there we would be, balancing on his hands. "Dad, the time has come, and you had to let go, and now we need to balance on our own in this world. I speak on behalf of my siblings when I say that we all hope that with everything you taught us, we will be able to do that. We thank you with the utmost gratitude for everything that you have done for us in your role as our Father. We pray that we can be as giving, as generous, as full of simcha, as positive, and as determined as you. We hope to continue your legacy of living life to its fullest, and while we may not take on your custom of always saying Shechianu, we certainly plan on trying to fully appreciate the brachot of family and friends that we have been blessed with, as much as you always did. I personally ask you for mechila for the times when I could have been a daughter, and I personally ask you for mechila, Daddy, for the times that I could have been a better daughter. Tehei nishmato Rab Tzur Chaim.
My name is Shlomo. I've been asked to read a grandchild speech written by Dov Gerson in Israel. But before I do, I'd like to say a couple words on behalf of dads, kids, spouses. After Tammy and I started dating at Camp Moshava, I was invited to dinner at the Buckmans for the first time. I was a bit nervous, but very excited. Tammy was a nervous wreck. I had never seen her so nervous before, or ever since much. She kept warning me that her father was not a typical father and that I shouldn't take anything he said seriously. Well, it didn't take long for me to understand her concerns, but at the same time, Dad was warm and welcoming, and his big heart shone through immediately. For the past 30 years, Dad has always reveled in all of his kids' spouses' accomplishments and showered us with the same unconditional love that he had for his own kids. Dad, in your own unique way, you are an outstanding example of a father-in-law to all of us, and we will do our best to emulate you. We love you, we will miss you dearly, and we will do our best to look after your precious children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And now the hesped from Dov in Israel. When I think of my grandfather, the first thing that comes to mind is a great time. Not only did Grandpa always have a smile on his face, he always knew how to put a smile on everyone else's face. I have about 1 million stories of fun activities and adventures with Grandpa. There were the regular day-to-day stories, fun or roughhousing and wrestling with Grandpa, sleepovers that included pool parties, watching Timon and Pumbaa, and dessert breakfast, awesome trips to Best Buy to buy the newest cool electronics. And Sundays, Grandpa would cheer me on and the rest of the grandchildren at my sporting events. There are also so many special fun activities. I remember Grandpa used to take us to the Bulls and Sox games as a special treat. We also we used to go to Six Flags, and he would get us all the yummy snacks, and we'd go on all the different rides. He took Yakir and me skydiving, indoor skydiving, and even gave me my first and last cigar at Ari's wedding. As I got older, I noticed it wasn't only Grandpa's big gestures and activities that put a smile on my face, but also so many little things. It was starting every phone, Skype, WhatsApp, or in-person conversation with 3 compliments. It was coming to Israel and spending all day in the living room, waiting for us to come home, just to observe us in our natural habitat. It was hearing that our computer was working a tad slow and deciding to clean it up, usually adding 30 new bugs on the way. I also noticed that it wasn't a special grandchild treatment. Grandpa put smiles on everyone's faces. Grandpa, also known as Cowboy Doctor, first started wearing his famous cowboy hats to put a smile on his patients' faces. He claims that once he wore a cowboy hat to a party and later went to the hospital to work with patients, and some of the patients with Alzheimer's remembered his hat and afterwards asked with a smile for the doctor with the cowboy hat. Ever since, he wore the same cowboy hat. I remember going with Yogi, as he was called, to the Sox game and having people from the staff coming up with huge grins to talk about the amazing photographer they had at fantasy camp. It was pretty remarkable to have the third base coach, mid-game, call up to the stands, "Yogi," and talk with us in between innings. I still remember how big the third base coach's smile was to see Grandpa at the time. I grew up on the multitude of special treatment stories, as we would call them in Israel, protectiot, that people always did for Mom because they had so much gratitude for Grandpa and how he cheered them up in different ways. Most famously, getting special parking at Bulls playoff games because the policeman on duty was a patient of Grandpa's, and this was his way of saying thank you to the awesome doctor. So when I came across this Gemara, it was no surprise that I thought of Grandpa. I will start straight from the translation in the Gemara Masechet Ta'anit. Rabbi Broka Choza was often found in the market of Beit Lefet, and Elijah the prophet would often appear to him. Once Rabbi Broka said to Elijah, "Of all the people who come here, is there anyone in the market worthy of the world to come?" He said to him, "No." In the meantime, 2 brothers came to the marketplace. Elijah said to Rabbi Broka, "These 2 have a share in the world to come." Rabbi Broka went over to the men and said to them, "What is your occupation?" They said to him, "We are jokers, and we cheer up the depressed." This skill of cheering up people going through a tough time or a sad time was something that Grandpa excelled in and was something we witnessed every time we spent time with him. What's so special about cheering people up? I think that it's even though there is no specific mitzvah in the Torah to put a smile on someone's face, it is included in the general commandment of following Hashem's way. Grandpa followed his path whole life, and I hope that I'm able to continue the amazing path he set for me and all of us. One thing that the whole family knows about Grandpa was his love for gematria. At every family simcha, Grandpa presented his gematria that he figured out at that occasion. So in his memory of that, in that memory, I tried to do a gematria about Grandpa. But to be honest, I just couldn't do it as well as Grandpa could. But while I was thinking about numbers, I did realize Grandpa passed away on the 36th night of the Omer. And that got me thinking. The 36th night of the Omer is the day Chesed Shebeyesod. I looked a little bit into the different sfirot and found that these were two very appropriate for Grandpa. Chesed is pretty simple. Grandma and Grandpa had done so much chesed and were always a great example for us for gomlei chasadim, for taking in Harush as a foster child after a year after the Iranian Revolution, or taking extra time with patients and needed extra attention, always visiting his mother when she had Alzheimer's, even though it wasn't so easy. I was talking with Tamar after Shabbos, and she mentioned that she never heard Grandpa say no. Mom also said that to me, that Grandpa couldn't help himself. No wasn't in his lexicon. He always wanted to give help and to those around him. Yakir told me that one time Grandpa asked him what he should get Mom for her birthday, and obviously Yakir had no clue, so Grandpa said, Yakir, that you should pay attention to the next couple of days and see if Mom is missing anything. Nothing makes him happier than getting people stuff that they are missing, because he knows that always puts a smile on someone's face. I think this story summarizes Grandpa as a Baal Chesed so well. He was also looking to see what people were missing and see what he could do to help them need. The second sphera is Yesod. Yesod is the sphera that bundles the other spheres together and passes them from Hashem in heaven to us here on earth. I thought this was fitting for Grandpa's passing. It was very clear that Grandpa saw it in his life, the mission to give back and spread love and joy. We felt it every day, and we had the incredible zchut to have him as our grandfather. We learned so much from him in his life and felt his love even from thousands of miles away. And now that we can no longer pick up the phone or a video call to see his huge smile and teary eyes just from a regular hi, we will miss him greatly. But I know and I'm sure that just like the sphera of Yesod bundles up all the great sphirot and brings them from Hashem down to us, we will continue feeling Grandpa's chesed and love all the way from Shemayim. It will accompany us through our lives, and we only hope to be worthy of continuing in the path he and Grandma so wonderfully showed us. Tehei nishmatot tzura b'tzro hachayim.
Okay. This is on behalf of me and all my siblings in Israel, Eitan, Adina, Yedidia, Nava, and Jerry. Ami. Dear Grandpa, we miss you. It's been under a week, and we already miss you deeply. We miss your smile, we miss your voice, we miss your laugh, and we miss your stupid jokes. We miss your fountain pens, and we miss your hat. We miss your hazelnut coffee, and we miss your endless number of laptops and cameras. As little kids, we remember and miss Shabbos at your house with you and Grandma. We miss Entenmann's for breakfast with you in your robe. We miss wrestling in the den, White Sox games with the family, and we miss sliding into the jacuzzi with all the cousins. We miss the 4th of July fireworks at your house, going swimming at the Negrug's pool, bridge at your house on Sunday night, and seeing you at Grandma at every single one of our graduations, piano recitals, dance recitals, and Little League baseball games, no matter what the weather. We miss being excited to see what new car you bought every 2 months. We miss coming home on Sunday night to see the sight of Shabbos leftovers out, you sitting at the head of the dining room table and drinking your tonic water with ice and giving us a full update on the newest medical gadgets and Apple products. We miss listening to My Name is Zoom birthday song every year, and we miss going to Taboo with you and waiting for you to order your meat extra rare just to send it back to the kitchen every time to cook it properly, and then ordering a chocolate mousse for the table. We miss your hugs and wet kisses. We miss you fixing our laptops. We miss hearing your amen on the phone for Abdullah. We miss calling you Dougie and you calling us beautiful in return. We miss the fun facts you would completely make up, but told to us with unbelievable confidence. Five Below trips were always the best. Grandpa told us to buy whatever we wanted, and then we would only really go through our purchases to see what in the world we bought when we got back home. Most of the fun was just buying things we didn't need in galore. We miss going to minor and Major League Baseball games with you for our birthday. We miss shopping trips to Fry's and Dick's. We miss you on your yearly boys golfing trip. We remember on a hot summer day after 2 bypass surgeries and a hip replacement, Grandpa put his clubs in his tank of oxygen in the back of a cart and did 18 holes of golf. Grandpa was a man that never quit, and a man that we will never quit loving. There are no words. Dougie, we feel so blessed to have been able to grow up with you and Grandma, playing such a big role in our lives. Despite for all the childhood memories mentioned, we have infinite memories of outings and jokes from these recent years. We're going to miss how happy you were at our grocery shopping drop-offs while Grandma was watching the news and you were at your computer. We will cherish our special Shabbases at your house. You'd always beg us to play poker, and you would cut the challah with the knife upside down just to make us laugh. We will cherish your socially distanced meals on our porch during Corona. We will miss sushi drop-offs, news updates, Pesach Seder's oxygen tank sounds, Rita's outings, spontaneous visits, North Face vests, and most of all, how much you loved us.
This is what we remember, but we know there is so much more to be said. The first pasuk verse in the 7th chapter, Perek of Kohelet states, Tov Shem Yishemen Tov V'yom Hamavet Miyom Hivaldo. A good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death than the day of birth. The 11th century biblical commentator of Shlomo Yitzchaki, Rashi, explains this pasuk with 2 statements. The first is by explaining that the reason that a good name or a good reputation is compared to oil is due to the fact that oil, in preference to other liquids, when put in water, rises to the top, floats, and is distinguishable. The second is by explaining that although oil may be fine, it is something that is temporary, as opposed to a good reputation, which is something enduring, something that lasts forever. When thinking of Grandpa, it is hard to imagine a better verse to sum things up, a good name and distinguishable. Grandpa was a well-respected doctor in Chicago, an icon at the White Sox fantasy camp in the summers, the famous camp doctor at Mosheva Wild Rose, and for many years a chazan at Maine Township. He was someone that everybody in the community loved and always greeted you with a smile. Even as little kids, all of our friends knew exactly which one was our grandpa, the one with the cowboy hat. When writing this speech, we realized it wouldn't be complete without putting in something that Grandpa would put in. The issue was we weren't benching, so we couldn't add Al Hanisim. And even after hours of thinking, we couldn't come up with a single gematria that was anywhere close to making any sense. Not that that ever stopped him. We had one more potential idea, but we didn't feel it was appropriate to ask anyone here to pull our finger. To end off, we just wanted to say something, Grandpa. Although you always meant it as a joke, your life was really one big Al Hanisim. There was never, and we mean never, anything that would get in the way of you persevering, staying positive, spending time with us, and loving us. From our perspective, the only thing we ever knew you as was a loving grandfather, and that is much easier said than done. Even though in the last few years some of us have been around a little less, the visits to you and Grandma were always the highlight of coming home. We are just so thankful to Hashem to have been blessed with the opportunity to have grown up 15 minutes away from such unbelievably loving grandparents for such a significant portion of our lives. Grandpa, you made your mark wherever you went, and we feel so blessed to have had you make such a big mark on us. You were always so proud of each and every one of us, and it always gave and continues to give us so much strength. We can't picture what our life will look like without you, but we know you're looking down right now at your 4 children and their spouses, 15 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, just saying, wow, in your raspy voice that we all know so well. We know how much we meant to you, and just wanted to take this opportunity to tell you one last time how much you meant to us. We love and miss you, Grandpa. And just a few words from me. I want to tell my siblings that although we were the ones who lived locally, Grandpa very much felt a part of your lives. Most of the time we spent with Grandma and Grandpa was spent talking about you. At Sunday night dinners, we got the weekly update on all of the cousins, aunts, and uncles. When we had Shabbos together, we talked about all the cousins, aunts, and uncles. And even when Grandma and Grandpa came with us to our friends' houses for Yontif meals, or Purim Sudas dressed as Elvis, we still talked about all the cousins, aunts, and uncles. I guarantee you Grandpa felt close to each of you, always. And to my cousins who do live locally and open their homes and hearts to him every day, every Chag, and in any way possible. He loved you, he loved your families, he loved your cooking, and he loved your company. Very few people have nieces and nephews as loving, doting, and attentive as you. Dad, we ask you for mechila, for anything we did wrong, didn't do right enough, could have done better, for maybe possibly speaking about you wrongly, misjudging, or misunderstanding you. We love you and the bracha you were in our lives. My siblings and I were blessed to grow up in a home of unconditional love. That was always a constant in our lives and still is. Even until his very last day, when he was saying thank you to the nurses, telling me and my mother to go learn more about AI, asking us about the X-ray technology, because he had an X-ray that day, or reminding me to take care of Mother, as he would call her, or even, especially most recently, when we were all together in Park Ridge for Shabbos 2 weeks ago while he was in the ICU, he was overflowing with unconditional love. Dad, we will take care of Mom. We will keep her the exact right amount of frustrated. And we will certainly do our best to remind her of the unconditional love you shared for 55 years. We love you and miss you always.
Please rise. El Molare Rachamim Shochein Bamaramin Hamitzei Menucha Nechono Al Kanfei Hashchina V'malos Kedoshim V'tohorim Kizarah Harakia Mazirim Et Nishmas Yaakov Ben Moshe Shahalach Li'olamo Bavor she'anachnu mispalalim biyad hazkoras nishmaso v'gan eden tehei menuchaso l'chein bal harachamim yastireyu b'seiser k'nafav li'olamim v'yitzor b'tzor ha'chayim et nishmaso Adonai hu nachalaso v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen.
may be seated for a moment. This concludes the funeral here at the chapel. The kavura will take place at Eretz Chaim Cemetery in Beit Shemesh tomorrow evening approximately 7 p.m. It all depends when the plane lands, so it's approximately 2 hours after the airplane lands. Most of the family is going to Israel. Rachel Spindel is going to be sitting, she's not going to Israel. She'll be sitting Shiva at 7141 North Kedzie, apartment 308, today after 4 p.m., Monday and Tuesday. And then once the family comes back from Israel, everybody will be sitting Shiva at the Drapkin residence at 3814 Enfield Road in Skokie. There's minyanim times and times when the family is going to be sitting Shiva on our website and also on the service folder that you received. There will be a Zoom link for the funeral in Israel on our website later on today for those who want to watch it. If we can all rise as we escort the urn from the chapel. Once we've left the chapel, the family is not going to the airport. They'll be going to their home for a few minutes, but the urn needs to leave right away to go to the airport.